Following the advice from the HMS Hood Association for this model, there's a correction that needs to be made at the rear portion of parts A21 and 22. It states that there were screens with large rectangular / square-like openings through them, but it doesn't give much detail about what actually needs to be installed over there. I've tried to find images online or even schematics of this area of the ship, but it has been impossible. When viewing this area of the ship from the port, which seems to be the most popular side to take photos of the ship, the problem is that there is a structure that sits over here that obstructs the view into this area of the ship. So I'm specifically looking for a photo or a schematic that shows the details of what happens in this area from the starboard side. So the request that I'm putting out there to all my viewers is, if you have a picture of this area of the ship, please send it to me so that I can understand what I need to construct over here. While I am waiting for an image and trying to figure out what to do with that area of the ship, I will continue working higher up in this area of the superstructure. Specifically, that is continuing the modifications to the torpedo control position. In the previous video, I widened this square to be the same width as this portion at the front, but I did not complete the process of widening the window sections that goes on top. As you can see from the recommendations from the HMS Hood Association, the torpedo control position, the square structure is too narrow. It should be the same width as the compass platform, and the rear portion of A24 with windows is of course too narrow. So what I'll do in this video is to cut this section off of this forward part and then cut it in half so that it can be widened and installed onto this part. I'll then fill in the gaps between the two halves and the gaps underneath the windows. Since I want to retain as much of this plastic as possible, I need to be careful about how I go about cutting this section off. I think the best approach will be to use a very thin saw. Using a knife or clippers will have the consequence of distressing the plastic and changing its shape. That's obviously undesirable. The problem with using a saw is that it will remove more plastic, and I want to minimize the amount of plastic that is removed. Fortunately, I have these very thin saws from Tamir. Essentially, it's a piece of very thin photo etch that's been etched into the shape of a saw.
When cutting with a very thin blade, it's important that you only put pressure on the blade when you're pulling it towards you. That's the direction in which these blades are designed to cut. If you put pressure when you're pushing it away from you, it'll cause the blade to bend, and that will just impede you from cutting and potentially break the blade. While cutting on the mat, it did start to pinch the blade a little bit, so I elevated it so I could put a bit of pressure onto this edge that I'm cutting off. That opens up the cutting area and prevents the sides of the plastic from pinching the blade. That makes it just a little bit easier to remove this last little bit of plastic. Although I could use a thicker blade to cut this part in half, I still used the thin blade simply because it was installed in the tool. I just cut it in my fingers and put a bit of pressure to pull the sides apart so that it's easier to cut through. On the top of the torpedo control platform where these window sections will be installed, there are two dots. These can be removed since this part has now been cut in half and these components no longer align in the same way that they used to. I then placed Revell Contactor Professional glue on the top of the torpedo control platform and placed the windows on top of the glue. Normally the dots would help align this part, but with those parts removed I have to do it by eye. Fortunately, this plastic cement does not dry quickly, so I have plenty of time to properly align the components. I now need to fill the gap between the two sections of window. These components are going to be mostly viewed from the side. On top of the section goes an air defense platform that is going to mostly conceal this gap. And on the side, there is this joint line that's going to need to be filled with putty anyway, so I decided that I'll just fill it all with putty. I could have also built a structure using plastic stock, but I don't think it really matters. Either solution would have worked just fine. Also need to fill the small gaps below the windows. This is also done using a little bit of plastic putty that I just force into that gap, being careful not to put too much on in that area and accidentally fill the windows. In some cases I do get a little bit of putty into the window area, in which case I use a wire to dig it out. Due to cutting the roof of the Torpedo Control Position off of the forward air defense platform, I did open up these windows at the side. When installing the roof of the compass platform, the corners of the Torpedo Control Position are visible, and therefore the sides of these windows being open is a problem. So I need to patch that with some styrene stock. I just found a piece of an appropriate size to glue into this area. I glue it down using Trumpeter extra thin plastic cement. While that glue is drying, I want to do a test fit with the roof of the compass platform just to make sure everything is going to fit nicely. If I need to make adjustments now, I'd rather do it while the glue is still wet and I'm able to rip these pieces apart. But fortunately, after a little bit of sanding to the back of the compass position, I can see that it will fit nicely, so I don't need to make any further adjustments. That means I can continue preparing this extra piece of styrene stock. I just clip it to length, and then I move on to filing and sanding this area. At the same time, I need to remove the excess putty. This is best done using a file. I'm now happy with the Torpedo Control Position. It's the correct width, its shape looks good, and all the gaps have been filled. So I can now move on to the assembly phase. At this point, I want to install the roof of the compass platform. That might seem a bit strange because the lower superstructure is not ready for it to be installed on just yet. That's because I want to close up the windows at the aft of the compass platform and blend it in with the Torpedo Control Position. That's going to be something that will be more difficult to do when the rest of the superstructure is installed. Ultimately, I'm going to want to install this platform on the platform below it first, so that I can fill and sand the gap in that area that I opened up 2 videos ago. I then do another round of filling with putty, which leads me into another round of sanding. I now need to check my work by spraying the area with a surfacer. I'm using Mr. Surfacer 500. Mr. Surfacer will fill micro scratches and help reveal larger defects that I'll then be able to correct. However, in this case, there aren't any substantial defects that I need to deal with, so I'm happy with this component as it is for now. It is going to be worked with some more in future videos, so I don't need it to be perfect just yet. So this is where I'll end the video. In the next video, I will continue with the modifications to this area of the superstructure and install this component onto the platform below. If you would like to support this channel or see how the ship looks when it is completed, then please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Cheers.